The first thing I remember is the ceiling. That cracked, off-white ceiling above my bed that I had stared at so many times in those early morning hours that I had memorized every single line, every shadow, every place where the paint had started to bubble near the corner by the window. It was 3:47 in the morning. I know that because I checked my phone, like I always did, hoping, praying, that somehow more time had passed than it felt like, that somehow I had actually slept, that somehow, this morning would be different from the one before it. It wasn't. The nausea hit first. It always did. Not a gentle wave, not the kind of queasiness you feel on a winding road or after eating something too rich. This was a full-body revolt, a lurching, violent, crawling feeling that started somewhere deep in my stomach and spread upward into my chest, my throat, the back of my jaw. I threw the blanket off before I was even fully conscious. My feet found the cold floor. My legs carried me down the hallway in the dark, one hand dragging along the wall because the dizziness had already started, that horrible spinning behind my eyes that made the whole world feel like it was tilted 2 degrees to the left. I made it to the bathroom. I always made it to the bathroom. I sank down onto the tile floor, back against the tub, forehead resting on the cool porcelain of the toilet, and I waited. The floor was freezing. October cold had settled into the house overnight and the heating hadn't caught up. Yet, I remember pulling my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms around myself. Shaking, though I was never entirely sure in those moments whether I was shaking from the cold, or from the sickness, or from something else entirely. Something quieter, something that lived underneath all the physical symptoms and didn't have a clean medical name. Fear, maybe. The fear that this was never going to stop. This had been going on for 4 months by that point. 4 months of waking up before dawn. 4 months of bathroom floors and trembling hands and a body that felt like it was slowly, methodically, betraying me in ways I couldn't explain and couldn't prove. I had seen my general physician 3 times. I had sat in a specialist's office and described every symptom in careful detail while she typed and nodded, and looked at her screen more than she looked at me. I had given blood vials and vials of it and waited, and hoped, and got the same answer every single time. Everything looks. Your results are unremarkable. Have you considered that this might be stress-related? I was a 34-year-old woman with a normal job, a house, a husband who brought me flowers on random Tuesday evenings. I ate well. I didn't drink. I exercised. There was, by every measurable standard that modern medicine had applied to my body, absolutely nothing wrong with me. And yet there I was, on the bathroom floor, again, at 3:47 in the morning, wondering if this was just going to be my life. Now, I want to tell you that I had some early sense that something darker was happening, that some part of me knew, even then, that this wasn't random, that it wasn't bad luck, or a mystery virus, or stress manifesting in strange ways. I want to tell you my instincts were sharper than that. But honestly, I didn't suspect a thing, because the person I should have suspected was asleep in the next room, warm and comfortable and utterly unbothered. The person I should have been looking at more carefully had looked me in the eyes every single day of those 4 months and said, "I just want you to get better, baby, we'll figure this out." He had given me the necklace 6 months before the sickness started, a delicate gold chain with a small pendant, simple, beautiful. He clasped it around my neck himself, and I remember thinking how warm his hands felt, how lucky I was, how much I loved him. I wore it every day. I never took it off, not to sleep, not to shower, not once in 6 months. Did that necklace leave my neck? Nobody, not one doctor, not one specialist, not one person in my life had ever thought to look at it, until a nurse, in a county clinic, on an otherwise unremarkable Wednesday afternoon, tilted her head slightly and said the 9 words that cracked my entire world open. "How long have you been wearing that necklace?" Let me take you back to before all of that, before the bathroom floors and the specialists and the blood draws that never showed anything. Before the mornings that felt like punishment and the evenings that felt like dread. Before I learned things about my life that I cannot unlearn, no matter how much time passes, no matter how much therapy I sit through, no matter how many ordinary, peaceful mornings I've had since. Let me take you back to when things were good, or at least when I believed they were. My name is Claire. I was 33 years old when I met Daniel, and I want you to understand something about who I was at that point in my life because it matters. It matters for everything that comes later. I was not a naive woman. I was not someone who had never been hurt before, never been disappointed, never had her trust tested. I had lived through a difficult childhood, worked my way through college on scholarships and part-time jobs, built a career in healthcare administration that I was genuinely proud of. I managed budgets and staff and complicated logistics for a mid-sized regional hospital. I was organized. Kite and I had, as my best friend Renee always said, a very good radar for nonsense. I thought I did anyway. I had my own apartment, my own routines, my own life that fit around me comfortably, like a worn-in jacket. I cooked on Sundays. I called my mother on Wednesday evenings. I ran 3 miles every Saturday morning through the park near my building, regardless of weather. I was, by any reasonable measure, a woman who had herself together. And then I met Daniel at a work conference. In March. He was not what I expected. That's the thing about people like Daniel, they are never what you expect, because they have spent years perfecting the art of being exactly what you need. He was tall, quietly confident, the kind of man who listened more than he talked in a room full of people fighting to be heard. He asked me a question about a presentation I had given that afternoon, a real question, a thoughtful one, and when I answered it, he looked at me like what I was saying genuinely mattered to him. Like he was filing it away carefully, like I was worth paying attention to. I know now what that was, but back then it just felt like being seen. We exchanged numbers. He texted that same evening, something low pressure and funny, and I remember smiling at my phone in my hotel room and feeling, for the first time in a long time, genuinely excited about another person. We had dinner the following weekend, then another. Then it stopped being dinners and started being weekends, and then it stopped being weekends and started being the quiet, unremarkable intimacy of two people who have decided without quite saying it out loud that they are building something together. He was romantic in a way that felt effortless, not performative, not the grand, exhausting gestures that always feel like they are more about the giver than the receiver. Daniel's romance was in the details. The way he remembered, months later, that I had mentioned loving a specific type of key, and one day it just appeared in his kitchen cabinet. The way he showed up to my office one afternoon when I had an awful week with a container of soup from the place I had mentioned in passing 3 weeks earlier. He paid attention. He remembered, and for someone who had spent most of her adult life feeling slightly invisible, that was intoxicating. We moved in together after 8 months, engaged after 14. The proposal was quiet and private, which was exactly right. No restaurant, full of strangers staring. No elaborate setup with friends hiding behind bushes with cameras. Just the two of us on the back porch of a rented cabin upstate, early evening, the kind of orange October light that makes everything look like a painting. He got down on one knee and said things I believed with my whole heart. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The necklace came 3 months after the engagement. It was a Sunday morning in January. Snow on the ground, coffee on the stove, the particular quietness of a winter weekend that has nowhere to be. He came downstairs with a small black box and set it on the table in front of me without a word, just watching my face. Inside was a gold chain, delicate and simple, with a small pendant, a shape that meant something personal to us, a reference to a joke we had. One of those tiny private languages that couples build. It was not flashy. It was not expensive looking. It was intimate. It felt like something only I would understand. 'Cause only I was supposed to. He clasped it around my neck himself, standing behind me, and kissed the top of my head, and said, "Don't ever take it off." I laughed. I told him I wouldn't. I meant it. Now, I need to be honest with you about something. Because this is a storytelling channel, and I promised myself when I started sharing this story that I would not smooth over the parts that are uncomfortable. There were things, even in those early months, that I noticed and quietly filed away, without examining too closely. Small things, the way he occasionally redirected conversations about my job in ways that felt supportive on the surface but left me feeling, somehow, slightly smaller. The way plans with Renee had a tendency to get complicated, not because he forbade anything, never that overtly, but because something always seemed to come up, some need of his that landed on the same evening, some mood that made leaving feel unkind. The way money, slowly, gradually, began to be a conversation he led and I followed. None of these things felt like red flags when they were happening. They felt like compromise. They felt like what you do when you love someone and you're building a life together. They felt normal. Because he was so good at making abnormal things feel normal. That is not an excuse. It is simply the truth of what it is like to be inside something that you cannot see clearly from the inside. I was happy. I genuinely believe that. I was. Wearing his necklace every day. And in 4 months, I would be on a bathroom floor at 3:47 in the morning, shaking, with no idea why. It started small. That is the thing I want you to understand before anything else, because when people hear a story like this, they imagine the sickness arriving dramatically, a sudden collapse, a obvious, undeniable moment where something is clearly, visibly wrong. But that is not how it happened. That is not how it happens for most people, I've come to learn. The thing that was happening to me arrived the way fog arrives, slowly, quietly, in such gradual increments that by the time you realize you can no longer see clearly, you have completely forgotten what clear ever looked like. The first symptom I noticed was the nausea. Early May. A Tuesday morning. I woke up feeling off in a way I couldn't quite name, not sick exactly, not the kind of nausea that announces itself as illness. More like the feeling you get when you've slept at a strange angle, or when you've had 1 cup of coffee too many on an empty stomach. I ate some toast. I went to work. By afternoon I felt fine. I did not think about it again. Then it happened the next morning, and the one after that. By the end of the second week, it was a pattern I could no longer dismiss as coincidence. Every single morning, without exception, I was waking somewhere between 3 and 5 in the morning with a nausea that ranged from deeply unpleasant to completely debilitating. Some mornings, I made it to the bathroom in time. Some mornings I lay very still in bed, staring at the ceiling, doing the slow breathing that sometimes kept things manageable until the worst of it passed. Daniel slept through most of it. When I mentioned it to him over breakfast one morning, he looked up from his phone with genuine seeming concern and said I should probably see a doctor. I agreed. I made an appointment for the following week. Dr. Harmon had been my physician for 6 years. She, thorough, practical, unflappable. She listened to everything I described, asked careful questions, ordered a standard blood panel, checked my vitals. Everything was normal. She suggested it might be a minor gastrointestinal issue, possibly stress-related given the wedding planning, and recommended I track my symptoms for another few weeks before we escalated anything. She mentioned that anxiety could manifest in remarkably physical ways, and that many of her patients were surprised to discover their bodies were carrying stress they hadn't consciously acknowledged. I nodded. I said that made sense. I went home. I tracked my symptoms. They got worse. By the end of June, the nausea had acquired companions. A fatigue that was unlike any tiredness I had experienced before, not the satisfying exhaustion of a long day or a hard workout, but something hollow and heavy, a bone-deep depletion that sleep did not fix. I was sleeping 9-10 hours and waking up feeling like I had not slept at all. My concentration at work began to slip in ways I had to actively work to hide. I would sit in meetings and realize, with a lurch of panic, that I had not absorbed a single word spoken in the last 5 minutes. I started keeping a notepad open at all times just to compensate. Then the brain fog arrived. That is the only way I can describe it. Fog, a thick, cottony dimness that settled over my thoughts and made everything feel like I was processing the world through several layers. Gauze. Words I had known my whole life suddenly required effort to retrieve. I would walk into a room and stand there, genuinely unable to reconstruct why I had come. I sent an email at work addressed to the wrong person, containing a budget figure that was off by an entire 0, and didn't catch it until my director flagged it an hour later. I had never made an error like that in 6 years. My hair started thinning in July. I found it in the shower drain first, more than usual. Enough to notice, enough to stand there with wet hands holding a small, alarming clump of it and feel something cold move through me. Then in my brush. Then on my pillow. Not falling out in patches, nothing so dramatic and visible that Daniel noticed immediately, but thinning quietly, steadily. The way everything in this story happened, thinning in a way that I could see when I pulled my hair back, a transparency at the temples that had not been there before. I went back to Dr. Harmon. More blood. Drawn, more waiting. More results that came back sitting firmly, maddeningly, in the normal range. She referred me to a gastroenterologist named Dr. Patel, who was kind and methodical, and who ordered an endoscopy that revealed nothing structurally wrong. He suggested I might have a functional gut disorder, possibly exacerbated by, and here was that word again, stress. He recommended dietary adjustments and a low-dose medication to help with the nausea. The medication did nothing. I saw a neurologist in August after the brain fog became impossible to ignore. She was the most thorough of all of them, an hour-long consultation, a battery of cognitive assessments, an MR1 that I lay very still for, in a loud, narrow tube, while trying not to think about everything that might or might not be illuminated by whatever that machine could see inside my head. I remember lying there thinking, please find something I can point to. Give me something with a name. The MR1. Clean. She said my cognitive symptoms were consistent with severe sleep disruption and possibly depression. She asked about my home life, my relationship, my stress levels. I told her things were fine. I believed that when I said it, she referred me to a psychiatrist and suggested that treating the underlying mental health component might resolve the physical symptoms. Daniel, when I told him about the psychiatrist referral, was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very gently, that he had been worried about me for a while. That he thought maybe this had always been something emotional rather than physical. That stress could do extraordinary things to a body, and maybe I had never properly dealt with certain things from my past. He said it with such care, such tenderness. His hand over mine on the kitchen table. I almost believed him. The psychiatrist was a small, sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Voss, who did not prescribe me anything after our first session, which surprised me. Instead, she asked questions, careful, probing questions that circled slowly around my marriage without ever quite landing on it directly. I did not understand at the time what she might have been listening for. I answered honestly, or as honestly as I knew how to be about something I had not yet fully examined. I was prescribed antidepressants by a different doctor shortly after. I took them. They made the fog slightly worse for 3 weeks and then leveled out into a kind of emotional flatness that I told myself was an improvement because at least the edges of the panic were softer. September arrived. I was tired all the time. I was nauseous every morning. My skin had taken on a pallor that people at work had started commenting on gently, carefully, the way people do when they are concerned but don't know how to say so directly. A colleague named Beth stopped me in the hallway one afternoon and held my face in both of her hands without asking permission, the way older women sometimes do, and looked at me for a long moment and said, "Honey, something is not right." I told her I was fine. I was being treated. The doctors were on top of it. I had stopped believing that entirely, but I didn't know what else to say. The night I ended up in the emergency room was a Thursday in late September. I had come home from work early, made it as far as the living room couch, and woken up 2 hours later to a heart rate that felt terrifyingly wrong, rapid, irregular, a fluttering in my chest. That made me genuinely unsure for several long and horrible minutes whether I was about to pass out. My hands were tingling. My vision was doing something strange at the edges. I called out for Daniel, who was in his home office, and the sound of my own voice scared me, thin and small and very far away. He drove me to the ER. He sat beside me in the waiting room with his arm around me, and to anyone watching, he looked like exactly what a devoted husband is supposed to look like in that moment, worried, present, steady. They ran an EKG, they ran blood panels. They monitored me for 4 hours and found nothing acutely dangerous, diagnosed me with a likely panic attack with possible cardiac palpitations, and sent me home with instructions to follow up with my cardiologist. I did not have a cardiologist. I had to get one. She found nothing wrong with my heart. It was somewhere in the middle of October, lying on that bathroom floor at 3:47 in the morning, that I had the thought I'd been holding at arm's length for weeks, the thought that arrived quietly without drama and settled into my mind with terrible clarity. What if no one ever figures this out? And it was the very next day, a Wednesday, gray and ordinary, a routine follow-up at a county clinic I had been referred to for a second look at my blood work, that a nurse walked into the examination room, looked at me the way medical professionals look at you when they are seeing the whole picture and not just the chart, and paused. Her eyes dropped to my neck, to the necklace, and she asked the question. Her name was Sandra. I want to say that clearly, and I want to say it first, before anything else in this section, because Sandra deserves to be named. She deserves to exist in this story as a full human being, and not just a plot device, not just the convenient moment where the mystery unravels. She was a woman in her mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the particular kind of calm that belongs exclusively to people who have spent decades in medical settings and have learned, through sheer accumulated experience, how to be unshakable without being cold. She had laugh lines and practical shoes and a lanyard covered in small enamel pins that I noticed, because I was nervous and my eyes were doing that thing they do when I'm anxious, cataloging small, irrelevant details as a way of avoiding the larger thing. She walked into the examination room with my chart open in Her hands introduced herself without looking up, and then looked up. That pause, that small, almost imperceptible pause before she crossed the room and sat down across from me, I have replayed it hundreds of times, because I did not understand it in the moment. I registered it the way you register a slight change in air pressure, a shift you notice without knowing what it means. Her eyes had moved to my neck, to the necklace, just for a second, then back to my face, professional, neutral, unhurried. She asked me standard questions first. How was I sleeping? How was the nausea on a scale of 1 to 10? Had anything changed since my last visit? I answered everything dutifully, the way you do after months of appointments, slightly mechanical, slightly defeated. The careful recitation of a person who has told this story so many times that it has started to feel like someone else's story. And then she set the chart down on the counter beside her, folded her hands in her lap, and said, very calmly, very evenly, as though it were the most natural question in the world, "How long have you been wearing that necklace?" I blinked. I actually looked down at it reflexively, the way you look at something when someone points at it even though you already know it's there, the small gold pendant resting just below my collarbone, the chain Daniel had clasped around my neck on that quiet January morning with snow on the ground and coffee on the stove. About 9 months, I said. Why? She did not answer immediately. Instead, she leaned forward slightly and said, "Would you mind if I took a closer look?" I said, "Of course." I leaned forward too. She lifted the chain gently with one finger, not touching the pendant itself, and turned it slightly in the light. Then, with the same measured calm, she said, "Can I see underneath it? The skin on your neck and collarbone where it rests?" I reached back and unclasped it myself the first time I had taken it off in 9 months, and held it in my palm while Sandra leaned in to look at the skin beneath. I could not see my own collarbone from that angle. I did not know what she was seeing, but I watched her face, and something moved across it. Not alarm, not the performative concern of someone who wants you to see that they are concerned. Something quieter and more certain than that. Recognition. She sat back. "There's significant discoloration here," she said, gesturing to the area where the chain had rested. "Some contact dermatitis, a rash that's been present long enough that the skin has started to harden, and hyperpigmentation. You've had this for a while." I stared at her. I never noticed," I said. Which was true, and also, in retrospect, not entirely true. I had noticed, in the vague and dismissive way that you notice things you are not ready to examine, a slight irritation I had attributed to summer heat, a pinkness I had mentally filed under sensitive skin. I had never once connected it to the necklace, because the necklace was a gift from my husband, and your mind simply does not go there when it is not yet ready to go there. Sandra picked up the necklace from my palm and held it near the window. She turned it over. She looked at the clasp, the chain links, the back of the pendant. She was quiet for a moment that felt much longer than it was. "What did your husband tell you this was made of?" she asked. "Gold," I said. "He said it was gold." She nodded slowly in that way that is, not really agreement so much as acknowledgement. She set it back down on the counter beside her, not in my palm this time. On the counter. That detail registered somewhere in my body before it registered in my mind. "The discoloration on your skin suggests a reaction to base metals," she said. "When jewelry is sold as gold, but contains high concentrations of other metals, nickel, cadmium, lead, sometimes others, the skin absorbs those metals over time, especially with continuous wear. What I'm seeing here is consistent with a prolonged allergic and toxic reaction." I heard the words. I understood them individually. Each one made sense in isolation, but my brain was doing something strange, arranging and rearranging them, refusing to let them form the sentence they were clearly forming. I sat there for what felt like a very long time and said nothing. "Toxic," I finally said. Just the one word. "Potentially," she said. "I don't want to get ahead of the testing, but given your symptom profile, the chronic nausea, the fatigue, the cognitive symptoms, the hair thinning, the skin changes, I want to run a full heavy metals panel. Specifically, I want to look at nickel, cadmium, and lead levels in your blood and urine." She said it the way you say something when you have already, privately, arrived at a conclusion and are now simply building the evidentiary path to get someone else there alongside you. She was not guessing. She was confirming. I understood that somehow even. Then, "Why hasn't anyone tested for this before?" I asked. My voice came out strange, very flat, very controlled, the voice of someone keeping something large and shapeless pressed down below the surface. She considered the question with the honesty it deserved. "It's not a standard inclusion in a general blood panel," You'd need a reason to look for it specifically. Most physicians aren't looking at environmental or material exposure unless something points them there directly. She paused. The necklace pointed me there. The tests were ordered before I left that appointment. Urine sample given on site, blood drawn in the same room, same chair, Sandra handing me a small cup of water afterward and sitting with me for a moment in a silence that felt, for the first time in months, like the right kind of silence. Not the silence of nothing being found, the silence of something finally, carefully being followed. I drove home with the necklace in my coat pocket. I did not put it back. I am not sure I made a conscious decision about that. My hands simply did not bring it back to my neck, and I did not correct them. I drove with one hand on the wheel and one hand pressed flat against my coat pocket, feeling the small weight of the pendant through the fabric, and I thought about 9 months. 9 months of bathroom floors, 9 months of doctors and blood panels and clean MRIs and being told, in 100 different gentle ways, that the problem lived inside my own head. The results took 11 days. 11 days during which I told no one what Sandra had found, not Renee, not my mother, not Daniel. I went through those 11 days performing normalcy with the particular, exhausting precision of someone who has just been handed a loose thread and is terrified of what will unravel if they pull it. I went to work, I made dinner, I slept beside my husband and watched him sleep and told myself I was waiting for the results before I let myself think anything further. That. It was only fair to wait for the results. But I had stopped wearing the necklace. When Daniel noticed 4 days in, over dinner he asked where it was. I said the clasp had been bothering me. He looked at me for a moment that went on slightly too long, and then he said, "You should get it fixed. I like you wearing it." I said I would. I didn't. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Sandra herself called, which told me something before she had said a word, because nurses do not personally call with results that are unremarkable. "Your heavy metals panel came back," she said. "Your cadmium levels are significantly elevated. Your nickel is well above the reference range. We also found traces of lead." A pause. "These levels are consistent with prolonged dermal absorption from a contaminated metal source worn in continuous contact with the skin." I was sitting at my desk at work. I had a spreadsheet open on my screen. Outside my office window, the parking lot was full of ordinary cars and ordinary afternoon light, and the world looked exactly the way it always looked, and I sat there with the phone against my ear and felt the entire architecture of the last 9 months rearrange itself around this single, devastating piece of information. It was the necklace. It had been the necklace the entire time. The relief and the horror arrived simultaneously, so intertwined I could not separate them. Relief, because I was not imagining it. I was not weak or anxious or broken. My body had been telling the truth every single morning on that cold bathroom floor, and it had been telling the truth the whole time. And horror, a slow, spreading, ice-cold horror, because if it was the necklace, and the necklace came from Daniel, then the question I had been refusing to ask myself for 11 days could no longer be refused. Why was my husband's gift poisoning me? I want to tell you about the 48 hours after that phone call. Because those 48 hours are where the story shifts in a way that I still find difficult to talk about, even now. Everything up to that point, as awful as it was, as frightening and exhausting and demoralizing as 9 months of sickness and unanswered questions had been, everything up to that point had a shape I could hold. A mystery has a kind of bearable quality to it, as long as it remains a mystery. It is the solving of it that breaks you open. I sat at my desk for a long time after Sandra's call ended. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I closed the spreadsheet on my screen and I opened a new document, and I just sat there, not typing, staring at the blank white space, while my mind did something I had never quite experienced before, a slow, methodical, almost clinical process of laying things out, side by side, in a row, the way you arrange evidence when some part of you already knows what it is evidence of, and another part of you is insisting, desperately, that there must be another explanation. The necklace was... Daniel gave me the necklace. Daniel told me it was gold. I had worn it every day because he asked me to, because he said, "Don't ever take it off." And I hadn't, not once in 9 months. Not until Sandra's quiet, careful eyes had moved to my neck and asked the question that changed everything. I went home that evening and I did not tell Daniel about the results. I made dinner. I sat across from him at the table we had picked out together at a furniture store on a Saturday afternoon. 18. Months ago, at a table I had thought of as ours, in a house I had thought of as ours, and I watched him eat and talk and be entirely, perfectly normal, and I felt the strange doubling that I imagine every person feels in this moment, the familiar person sitting across from you, and the unfamiliar question sitting inside your chest, growing larger with every passing minute. After dinner, while he watched television in the other room, I went upstairs. I opened my laptop, and I started looking for the necklace. Not the necklace itself, I knew where that was, sitting in the small dish on my dresser where I had placed it the day I came home from Sandra's appointment. I was looking for its origin, its paper trail. Because Daniel had told me, when he gave it to me, that he had it made, custom. A jeweler he knew, someone recommended by a colleague, a small independent workshop that did bespoke pieces. He had given me that story with such easy, natural detail that I had never once thought to examine it. I went through his email first. I want to be transparent about that. I went through his email and I will not apologize for it, because by that point I had elevated cadmium in my bloodstream and 11 days of quiet, building dread, and I was done waiting for permission to understand what was happening to my own body. His email was open on the shared family laptop we kept in the study. He had never logged out, had never seemed to feel any particular need to, and I searched for name of the jeweler he had mentioned. Nothing came up. I searched for jewelry, for necklace, for the date of our engagement anniversary when he had given it to me. I searched broadly and I searched specifically, and I found absolutely nothing that corresponded to the story he had told me. No order confirmation, no receipt, no correspondence with any jeweler, independent or otherwise. Nothing. What I did find in an email thread from the previous December, 6 weeks before he gave me the necklace, was a purchase confirmation from an overseas wholesale marketplace. A bulk accessories order. The kind of site that sells jewelry by the dozen, by the hundred, at prices so low that the math only works if the materials are worth almost nothing. The confirmation listed an order of 12 assorted pendant necklaces, gold-toned. The price for all 12 was less than what most people spend on a single lunch. I stared at that email for a very long time. 12 necklaces. He had bought 12, my custom, intimate, bespoke gift, the one with the private meaning, the one that referenced our personal language, the one he had clasped around my neck himself, and asked me never to remove, was one of 12 identical pieces, ordered in bulk from a wholesale supplier at roughly $3 per unit. That alone could have been explained away. People buy inexpensive jewelry. Not everyone can afford a real goldsmith. There is no crime in a cheap necklace, and I knew that. I sat with that knowledge and tried to let it be enough, tried to let the explanation stop there. He had been embarrassed about the cost, had built a story around it to make it feel more significant, and the toxic metals were simply an unfortunate consequence of low-quality materials. I almost let myself believe that, and then I kept reading. 3 weeks before the necklace purchase, November, early November, the autumn before our January engagement anniversary, there was an email thread with a subject line I will not reproduce here because some things I am still not ready to put into plain language. But the content of that thread, between Daniel and a woman I had never heard of, told me things about my marriage that rearranged every memory I had of it. The relationship was not new. It had been running parallel to ours for over a year. The language in those emails was not the language of two people in the early, uncertain stages of something. It was intimate and domestic and completely, shockingly, comfortable. Like a life within a life. I closed the laptop. I went to the bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub for a while. Then I called Renee. It was 11:30 at night. She answered on the second ring, which told me that she had been waiting, in that way best friends wait, not hovering, not intrusive, but available in a way that communicates. I am here whenever you are ready. I had not told her about the test results yet. I had not told anyone. But when she answered and I said her name and nothing else, she said, "Come here, come right now." I told Daniel I needed some air. He looked up from the television, and something moved across his face, something I might have misread 100 times before, but could read with perfect clarity now. A quick, almost imperceptible calculation, then concern arranged neatly over the top of it. "You okay?" he said. "I just need some air," I said. I drove to Renee's house and I sat in her kitchen and I told her everything. The test results, the email, the 12 necklaces, the other woman. I told it in the flat, careful voice of someone who is holding themselves together through sheer structural determination, and Renee sat across from me and listened to all of it without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and put both of her hands over mine and said, "We are going to handle this, starting right now." She called her brother, who is an attorney, at midnight. He answered. The next morning, before Daniel was awake, I went back to the house and I photographed every page of the email thread on my phone. I photographed the wholesale purchase confirmation. I forwarded what I could to a private email account Renee had helped me set up the night before. I moved through the house quietly and methodically, and tried not to look too long at any of the objects in it, the furniture we had chosen, the photographs on the walls, the small accumulated evidence of a life I had believed in completely. I was at a lawyer's office by 10 o'clock. The confrontation happened 3 days later. I had been advised to wait, to have certain things in place first, and I had waited, and they were in place. And I was as ready as a person can be for a conversation that they know is going to detonate everything. I chose the kitchen. Neutral ground, familiar space, morning light. I had the medical report in front of me on the table. I had printed it out. I laid it flat and pushed it across the table toward him when he sat down, and I said, very quietly, "I need you to explain this to me." He looked at the report. The elevated cadmium. The nickel. The lead. His face did something complicated. He started with concern. He said he had no idea. He said the jeweler must have misrepresented the materials, that he was as shocked as I was, that he was so sorry, that we would get to the bottom of it together. I let him finish. Then I put the wholesale order confirmation on the table beside the medical report. The concern left his face. What replaced it was not guilt, not remorse, not the crumbling of a man confronted with something he cannot talk his way around. What replaced it was something cooler and more careful than any of that. A stillness, a recalibration. And in that stillness I saw, with a clarity I will never be able to unfeel, who I had actually been living with. He did not confess to anything deliberate. He maintained, through everything that followed the legal proceedings, the separation, the formal investigations that were eventually opened, given the severity of the metal toxicity findings, that it had all been innocent. A cheap necklace, a coincidence, a terrible, unfortunate coincidence that he was deeply sorry about. Whether that is true, I honestly cannot tell you with legal certainty. What I can tell you is what the toxicologist told me during my formal medical evaluation, that the cadmium found in my system were not consistent with brief or accidental exposure. That continuous dermal absorption over 9 months, from a source worn directly against the skin, day and night, without removal, would produce exactly the symptom progression I had experienced. That if I had continued wearing the necklace, the long-term consequences to my kidneys and neurological system would have been severe. That without Sandra, in that county clinic, on that gray Wednesday afternoon, without one woman paying attention to something everyone else had looked past, I would still be on that bathroom floor. And I might have stayed there for a very long time. I am better now. I want to say that clearly, and I want to say it first, because this story deserves to end in a place of light, not a tidy light, not the kind of brightness that pretends the darkness never happened, but the real kind. The kind that exists specifically because of how long the darkness lasted and how hard the climb out of it was. The physical recovery took 8 months. Cadmium does not leave the body quickly or graciously. It is stubborn in the way that all the worst things are stubborn, clinging, slow to release, demanding patience from a person who has already spent the better part of a year being patient with a body that was suffering in ways nobody believed. I worked with a specialist in environmental toxicology. I followed a careful protocol. I went to every appointment. I ate the right things. And rested when I needed to rest, and slowly, incrementally, the nausea retreated, the fog lifted, the fatigue loosened its grip. One morning in June I woke up at 7 o'clock naturally, without the alarm, and lay there for a full minute before I realized the nausea had not come. I had simply woken up, like a normal person. Like someone whose body was not at war with itself. I cried for a long time after that. The emotional recovery is less linear, and I will be honest with you about that. Too, because I think it is important. Healing from betrayal does not follow a protocol. There is no specialist for the particular grief of discovering that the person you built your life around was not the person you believed you knew. Therapy helped, Renee helped, my mother helped, time helped in the slow, unglamorous way that time always helps, not by making you forget, but by gradually increasing the distance between who you were inside that experience and who you are becoming outside of it. I am becoming someone I recognize again. That is the best way I can say it. I think about Sandra often, A woman who had every reason to walk into that examination room, follow the standard protocol, and walk back out. A woman who looked at me, really looked at the whole picture, at the thing everyone else had walked past 100 times, and asked one quiet, simple question. 9 words. How long have you been wearing that necklace? 9 words that gave me my life back. So here is what I want to leave you with if you take nothing else from this story. Trust your body. When it tells you something is wrong, regardless of what any chart or panel or well-meaning professional concludes. Advocate for yourself with the same tenacity you would advocate for someone you love completely, and pay attention to the people around you, to the details that seem small, to the questions that feel almost too simple to ask. Sometimes the most important question in the world is the one nobody thought to ask yet. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to this story. It mattered to tell it.